we announced for our client, Robert Rosebrock, who's a veteran, Vietnam vet. He's about 75 years old. And he's been protesting at a VA facility in Los Angeles. There's a well-known VA facility at, it's essentially in the heart of Los Angeles. You can't miss it if you know the town. And virtually every week for the last, 10 years, he and a small group of veterans have been outside that facility protesting the use of the facility for non-veterans uses, for non-veteran purposes. It's supposed to be used for to help homeless veterans and things like that, but it's used for all sorts of ridiculous community purposes that have nothing to do with veterans. Typical VA corruption and abuse. So Mr. Rosebrock, being the patriotic veteran, is outraged by this, and he protests repeatedly, and they don't like him out there because of these protests. And he was prosecuted by the VA and the Justice Department for taking photographs of flags on a VA fence. And he was also prosecuted for placing two small flags. You've seen the flags at parades. You hold them in your hand, they're about 3 by 5. I think supposedly he had placed two of them, or it's alleged he placed two of them on the fence, and they tried to prosecute him for that. Well, he was acquitted by a magistrate. And he was acquitted on the photography on First Amendment grounds. This wasn't good enough for the VA. They appealed that. So it went from the magistrate to the U.S. District Court judge, and the U.S. District Court judge looked at the law and said, look, I've read your regulations. They don't even prohibit what you're charging him for. He threw it out. So we had the lower court, the magistrate, throw it out on constitutional grounds, and then the U.S. District Court judge comes in and says, well, the law doesn't even allow you to prosecute him. You don't even need to make the constitutional argument. Why on earth was the VA prosecuting this veteran, Robert Rosebrock, other than retaliation for his embarrassing protest about the misuse of that VA property in Los Angeles? You know, and we've uncovered fraud at that facility, and at least highlighted it. And we also investigated this issue generally at the VA in terms of the prosecution of Mr. Rosebrock. And we found documents that I guess he used to be the Secretary of Veterans Affairs, David Shulkin. He questioned the Rosebrock prosecution because he evidently saw Judicial Watch's efforts to highlight this abuse targeting Mr. Rosebrock. And the documents show his staff misled him about what was going on because, to his credit, he said, why are we doing this? And they told him, well, you know, you just can't believe everything you read in the media. When in fact they were blowing smoke at him on this. So it's good that, obviously we're so pleased that our client is going to face any criminal penalties as a result of a prosecution, but isn't it outrageous? We had to fight, not once, but in 2 courts to protect them from being persecuted and prosecuted by the VA and Justice Department. You know, and frankly, the president should ask, who of the VA and DOJ is responsible for the persecution of our client, veteran Robert Rosebrock, for exercising his First Amendment protected rights? So when you see these stories about the VA, and I know there are major issues there, but this is a very good example of just how to control that agency is. And Judicial Watch was in court trying to protect a veteran from being put in jail by the VA for protesting what the agency was doing with one of its most significant properties the agency holds in all of the United States. So I'm glad we're able to help Mr. Rosebrock, but we've got to end that corruption at the VA, and I hope the ending of this case draws the attention of VA leadership and maybe even the White House.